Another way to use the 24 and 24 half square triangle ruler is to be able to produce 96 2-inch half square triangles. And the way you accomplish that is you will do your marking just like we did on the first couple of examples, where you mark through all of the diagonal, vertical, and horizontal lines. But then the next step in your marking would be to take the ruler and flip it over, lay it back down on your fabric, and complete your marking again. This time you'll notice that there's a few little tiny slots that you will also make a marking in. Once you have the fabric completely marked, it will look like this. To sew this example, it's very similar to what we did a while ago when we started sewing at the bottom and we sewed on the inside line all the way through the project until we reached the end. Then we skipped over and we sewed back the other direction until we got back to the point where we started. Now you will sew a second series of lines, and you sew them the very same way, starting at the corner and sewing through on the outside until you get down to the corner, skip over to the middle, and sew all the way back. Then when you're cutting this unit apart, there's a couple of extra cutting lines that you will do, and that's where the little bitty slots that we marked come into play. So when you start marking this unit on your cutting mat with your rotary cutter, you will actually line up your ruler with the small little marks and you will cut through. And I'm doing the horizontal lines first. Then you will cut through the next horizontal line and continue down your piece. The next lines are your vertical lines, and again you will use the little bitty markings that you made through the slots. Line up your ruler on those little slots, cut through on your rotary cutter, and continue cutting through your vertical lines. And as I mentioned before, be careful not to scramble your pieces up. Keep them in place. And then your last lines to cut will be on your diagonal lines. And then once you're completely finished cutting through, you open up your 96 half square triangles. This is what you will have for your project. Another use for the 24 and 24 half square triangle ruler is to be able to produce quarter square triangles. And I'm going to show you how to accomplish that. As you will notice here, I don't have the two back quarters together like I had in the previous example, but you can actually start out with back quarters. I just have a section of the back quarters here that I'm going to show you. The marking on this is very similar to what you've done in the other example, except in this example you will mark on a diagonal line in this section, and I just mark the outside diagonal line. Then you'll mark the inside diagonal line, outside, inside, outside, inside, all the way around your project. And then you also mark the horizontal lines and the vertical lines. So once you're completed with your marking, you can see how you've marked all of the middle lines, but the outside lines jump from the outside to the inside. Once you're at the sewing machine, you're going to sew only on those diagonal lines that you've drawn, going from the outside inside. The cutting is very similar to what we did on the other example, whereas you take your straight edge and start cutting the units apart. Again, I start with the horizontal line first, then I go to the vertical lines, and then I go to the diagonal lines. Once you cut your units apart, you will actually end up with the larger version and the smaller version in the same sewing and cutting sequence. Then, if you use this same technique where we flipped over and made 96 half square triangles, but as you're marking on that project, if you alternate lines, you will end up with the smaller quarter square triangles. Hope you enjoy experimenting with your half square triangle ruler, and you will find, I'm sure, some variations of your own. Another way to use this ruler is by taking two back quarters, right sides together. But when you do your marking this go around, rather than marking all the slots in the ruler, you will only mark the diagonal slots here at the top 1/3 and the diagonal slots at the bottom 1/3, along with your horizontal lines and your vertical lines. And then when you sew, you will actually just sew back and forth on the top diagonal lines, and then reverse it, and then go to the end and sew the diagonal lines down here. And then once you cut those units apart, you will actually end up with some very large units that you can see right here. And then you end up with 8 of those units, and I've actually sewn 2 together here, 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here, and created this little wall hanging. Thank you for watching the demos today on the 24 and 24 ruler, and I invite you to watch our other YouTubes that are also part of our website. And the rulers are available for sale on the website at www.rulerrevolution.com. Thank you.